So, Berto, today's episode is just going to be for patrons of the podcast, but I thought we would do an introduction. The reason why I want this to be for patrons only is because you and I are going to be taking a personality test that is pretty involved, and we'll be talking about our own personalities and our own
foibles.
Yeah, and I would rather not have that go to literally everyone on the planet. Okay. I usually try to limit that to just the patrons. So what do you say we find out what is wrong with the two of us? Berto, what do you say?
Let's do it.
All right. Today is the episode of a podcast called Psychology in Seattle, and I am a co-host called Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I make deciduous Christmas trees.
So this is a personality test that we're going to be taking. But Berto, what is personality?
Yeah, it's funny you should ask. When I was about 12 or 11, my cousin, older cousin, she wasn't really my cousin. They called her my cousin, but we weren't actually related.
Good story.
Yeah. But anyways, she was 2 years older than me, and she always dated these older guys. But I had a major crush on her.
Okay.
And one day I remember she told me, well, the problem is you have no personality.
Right, you've said that before.
And I was like, so puzzled by this. I'm like, I have no person. How does one acquire a personality? What do I have to do to have a personality? And it always haunted me for the rest of my days. How does one acquire a personality? I think that the way we're meaning it is, sort of like what is our behavior with others, with ourselves in social situations and things like that. But there's apparently some magic out there that if you have the right personality, you'll get the right girl. Okay,
so that's a part of personality, but and certainly in colloquial language, people say that person has personality, that person doesn't have personality.
Right.
That is not the way we use it in psychology. Personality, in a nutshell, is and this is my definition, the relatively consistent patterns of thinking, behaving, and feeling. So, in other words, Berto, you consistently, when you enter a party, are talkative. So that is a consistent pattern of behavior that we would say is a description of your personality. It makes us, when you add up all the qualities of our personality, the big ones and the small ones, it distinguishes us from other people.
Right.
So another way of thinking about this is that it's our interpretations, the way we interpret the world is based on our personality. Our emotional experiences and our emotional expressions are based on our personality. If someone is very expressive, then that's a personality trait, whereas another person doesn't show their heart on their sleeve. That's a part that it seems consistent over time. And
right.
When you have friends, you can describe them like that person is very warm, that person is very cold, that person is very ambitious, that person is very into children, that person is really into saving the planet, that person is very into their job or whatever. And our motivations and behaviors are based on personality. Research shows that, as with many things, it's a combination of biology and our experience. And there are various different models and theories regarding personality. I could talk about this forever and ever, but commonly known models and theories are psychoanalytic, behaviorism, humanistic attachment, that kind of thing. But in terms of personality tests, Berto, what are some popular personality tests out there?
Myers-Briggs.
Right. What else? We've actually taken a few.
Yeah. There's the, I don't remember what it's called, but there's the one where it gives you the, colors.
Huh.
What was it? What's that one?
Well, we did
a color,
Enneagram.
I'm orange and...
Okay, I don't know that one. But we did Enneagram.
Enneagrams, yeah, right.
And astrology is another personality typology based on when you're born. Also, you will see on Facebook, which Harry Potter character are you?
Right, like comparisons to fiction.
Right. And what makes all of these unscientific and not very useful, Berto? Because they are.
I mean, so if we had enough samples and, you had aggregated it for 1 million people, and then you randomized all those 1 million people, and then you actually tracked their behaviors in real life, and then you compared it to their answers, and then you could probably form something. But normally all these online tests, they have nothing of that. It's just kind of for fun, you know. They make some high level generalizations, and then
right. I think what you're saying is that a good, valid, reliable personality test predicts behavior. It predicts our interpretations. For example, if the Myers-Briggs gives you a typology and it says you are this kind of person, it should be able to predict what a group, you know, if you take 100 people with that typology, with, you know, ENFJ or whatever, and you present them with a situation in a lab, like you have to help someone, but they're a jerk face, then we would see a signal there. There would be some kind of grouping based on the 16 types. But what we find is that that's not true. What's another aspect of personality testing that you have to have in order to make it like a scientific and helpful thing?
Sorry, but you're saying that that's not true even of like Myers-Briggs.
Right.
Oh, I see.
It's not true of Enneagram. It's not true of astrology. It's not true of Facebook.
I thought you were talking about more of like the Facebook and the astrology ones.
No, all of them. Facebook is just as unreliable as Myers-Briggs and astrology and Enneagram. And it makes sense because Myers-Briggs, astrology, and Enneagram were all established by people pre-science, essentially. Or Myers-Briggs was during science, but it was developed unscientifically. It was developed based on an interpretation of Jung, and it was just anecdotal. You know, it's not based on research. It's not based on observation. And I'm not saying Myers-Briggs is useless. I'm not saying Enneagram is useless or astrology is useless. I'm just saying that we don't use it in psychology because it's not scientific.
Interesting. So nowadays, you could, if you could get around the privacy aspects, but if you asked people enough questions and then had simply statistical correlation to all their actual decisions, then you could end up with a generated model of something that would be predictive.
And we do have, we've approximated that. I mean, not every data point.
Like Facebook has that. That's what Cambridge Analytica was exploiting.
Yeah, and I'd be curious as to what sort of typologies they have. I mean, it's basically just based on capitalism. But anyway, so why else are Myers-Briggs, astrology, and Enneagram and Facebook not considered useful to psychologists?
Why else?
Yeah.
They're probably biased.
What do you mean?
They were probably developed with, you know, certain cultural biases and geopolitical biases.
Yeah. Well, really all personality tests have baked in bias because they're all developed by people with bias. So that's not. It
also could be because of self-reporting.
Right. Like so that's another issue. So let me just sort of comb through, which I think you're zeroing on a little bit. But another thing is that your type changes too quickly and too often. So with Myers-Briggs, we found that, because one of the things about a personality type is that it's presumably a relatively consistent part of your personality. Your personality can change over time for sure, and we'll get into that later. But generally speaking, if you're talking about a type, we're talking about something that can, you know, sort of stay consistent, at the very least month to month or day to day.
Right.
Whereas with Myers-Briggs, astrology, Enneagram, and Facebook, you don't find that. You find that people, when you test groups of people, they don't stay in the same category from day to day, which indicates that it isn't really measuring personality. It's measuring something else, like your mood that day or something, which is fine, but you can't call it a personality test. The other aspect of these tests is that the types aren't actually different. You know, like some typologies just highlight positive traits and common flaws. Like you might hear someone say for astrology, for example, you know, because you were born in this month, you are hardworking, responsible, pessimistic, and stubborn. Well, most people consider themselves to be hardworking and responsible. I mean, I'm guessing there's a minority of people who are just like, no, I'm a lazy SOB. I mean, everyone tries, you know, and stubborn, you know, I would say that, how do you quantify stubbornness? I mean, everyone has a stubborn streak, right? And everyone has pessimistic streaks, you know, that kind of thing. So when you have these, typically astrology is like this, but other Enneagram is kind of like this as well, that when you tell people, you take the test and you tell people what type they are, you can actually mix it all up and just say a random one back to someone, and they're like, oh my God, that's so me. And that's one of the ways that you test these things. Now, I know there's people out there that love Myers-Briggs, they love Enneagram, and that's fine. It can be useful. If it resonates with you, then great. But science has really tried to establish these tests because they're so widely used and they've been studied thousands upon thousands of times. And they've really tried to say, okay, can this be useful as a personality construct?
And they've not been able to do
they've not been able to do that. Again, if it's useful, just like if you're a Catholic and that's useful to you,
right.
But science hasn't proven that God exists.
For example, I found the Myers-Briggs useful at work because we did it as a team, and then it opened up a conversation about different work styles and being accepting of other work styles and things
so
like that.
So if it facilitates a conversation and that enhances productivity and profit, then it did its intention. Did it actually test personality or assess personality? Probably not.
And then we had to write in red letters, our letters in our forehead. Yeah. And as we walked, people pointed and laughed.
Yeah. The other thing that I can think of as to why some of these tests aren't very respected is that the types basically just summarize your responses. Like if you said, because it's self-report, and so one of the things, true or false, I like sex, and you say true. And then so they ask like 50 questions, and at the end they say, you're the type of person who likes sex. And then the person's like, oh my gosh,
that's true.
Yeah, a lot of tests are actually like that. Like a lot of the Enneagram and Facebook tests, they're all kind of like that. And it's like, yeah, well, you just asked a bunch of questions and then summarized the answers in a paragraph, and that doesn't mean anything.
Well, it's like, have you seen the ones about what's your spirit animal?
Yeah.
It's the same idea, because it asks you things like, would you rather fly or swim? And then in the end, it's like, oh, I am a fish. That's crazy.
I know. So the tests that are actually used by psychologists and have, decades of testing to establish its validity and reliability, meaning that the test seems to be consistent over time when it's administered to the same person over time, and the typology that it generates tends to be predictive of other things and you've taken the MMPI and the MCMI.
Oh, I forgot those. Yes,
years ago. This would have been 12 years ago.
Those were long.
They are, yeah.
400 questions.
Yeah, I think the MMPI takes like 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours. It's boring too.
Did Mandy take it or Lita take it? Yeah.
No, Mandy, yeah.
Mandy took it, okay.
The PAI, and then the Big Five inventory is the BFI too.
Right.
So that's what we're going to talk about today is Big Five. And some of these other tests actually get at the Big Five. I'm pretty sure the PAI gets at it. But the Big Five personality traits are, in psychology, the seemingly most scientific and most reliable, in that when you test on the Big Five, so Big Five meaning there are 5 personality spectra that everyone sort of tests on, and that's what we're going to take, Berto.
Got it.
And
what's like conscientiousness,
right? Openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and stable emotionally. Neuroticism is sort of the negative side.
What's that supposed to mean?
And so when we administer these tests and we give them we rate you on these 5 different spectra, we find that over time you tend to test similarly. They do change over time, potentially, but relatively stable over time, and it absolutely predicts behavior. There's so many studies showing that people who are more open react to this situation in this consistent way. People who are high on neuroticism have more physical ailments. There's all sorts of associations that seem to be borne out from this typology. And for people out there, it might be a little surprising, because you would think that personality would be pretty easy to categorize, you know,
Right.
this person is X.
An introvert.
Yeah, this person, well, introvert, extrovert, and actually is one of the things, but this person is.
But even in that one, for example, as we've discussed before, like a lot of us have aspects of both,
Right.
you know, and yeah.
Right. But other dimensions like, you know, this person is type A, you know, they're really ambitious, you know, that kind of thing. And what we find is like, it's really context dependent.
Right.
Some people who are labeled as ambitious are just that way because of the constraints that the context provides for them. You know, an example of that for me is at Antioch when I first started as a full-time professor. I was, you know, one of the youngest, if not the youngest professor on staff, and everyone was on average 20 years older than me. I was very intimidated, and I was quiet. I didn't talk much at all. I kind of went into a mode of just survival. Half the time I didn't know what anyone was even talking about, because at university administrative talk is like a whole other language, you know, and all based on premises. I didn't really understand it at the beginning. And so in the beginning, people called me reserved.
Right.
But Berto, among my friends, no one would call me reserved.
No, of course not.
I mean, you and I are the loudmouths.
Yeah.
And so
I know one more in our friendship group that's like that.
Yeah.
But,
am I reserved or am I a loudmouth?
Right.
Well, it's, you know, it's context dependent, and we'll get into that. But so I want to, and we're going to take this test. It's going to take some time. There's, I don't know, 40 questions. We're going to kind of discuss our answers, and it's going to be for patrons only. So
sounds good.
If you want to hear the rest of this episode, become a patron of the podcast, and then you'll be able to hear this episode along with hundreds of other episodes that are really our best episodes, our patron-only episodes. Do it now, Berto, right?
Do it now.